The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the stone walls of the Palazzo Vecchio as Niccolo Machiavelli penned his final observations on the nature of power and human manipulation. It was 1525, and the former Florentine diplomat had witnessed the rise and fall of princes, the machinations of popes, and the endless cycle of political intrigue that defined Renaissance Italy. What he discovered in those turbulent years would become the foundation for understanding not just political power, but the very essence of how minds are conquered and defended. Today, 5 centuries later, the manipulators among us employ the same fundamental strategies that Machiavelli observed in the courts of the Medici and the Borgia. They may wear business suits instead of velvet robes, and their battlefields may be boardrooms rather than city-states. But the core principles remain unchanged. The human mind, with all its predictable weaknesses and exploitable biases, presents the same vulnerabilities that cunning individuals have exploited for millennia. This document presents 6 essential principles extracted from Machiavelli's observations, refined through centuries of psychological research, and adapted for the modern individual who seeks to protect their mental sovereignty. These are not merely theoretical concepts, but practical weapons in the war against those who would bend your will to serve their purposes. Part 1. The Foundation of Mental Fortification, the Principle of Calculated Skepticism. In the spring of 1503, Machiavelli found himself in the court of Cesare Borgia, watching as the notorious Duke of Valentinois effortlessly manipulated a room full of supposedly shrewd diplomats. The Duke's method was deceptively simple. He presented information with such confidence and apparent sincerity that even seasoned negotiators accepted his claims without verification. Machiavelli noted in his private journal that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. This observation reveals the first and most crucial defense against manipulation: calculated skepticism. The manipulator's greatest ally is your assumption that people generally tell the truth and act in good faith. This assumption, while necessary for basic social functioning, becomes a fatal weakness when dealing with those who operate without moral constraints. Consider the modern workplace manipulator who approaches you with urgent requests accompanied by emotional appeals. "I really need your help on this project," they say, their voice heavy with apparent stress. "Management is breathing down my neck, and you're the only one skilled enough to handle this." The request seems reasonable, even flattering, but the calculated skeptic recognizes the manipulation tactics embedded within. The artificial urgency, the ego stroking, and the implied crisis that requires immediate action without reflection. The principle of calculated skepticism operates on multiple levels. At its surface, it demands verification of claims before acceptance. When someone presents you with information, especially information that benefits them or requires action from you, the first question should never be, "How can I help?" but rather, "How can I verify this?" This does not mean becoming paranoid or cynical about every human interaction, but rather developing what Machiavelli called the fox's cunning, the ability to detect snares before stepping into them. The deeper level of calculated skepticism involves understanding the psychology of believability. Manipulators exploit specific cognitive biases that make certain information more readily accepted. They understand that people are more likely to believe information that confirms their existing beliefs, information presented by someone they find likable, and information delivered with confidence and apparent expertise. The skilled manipulator will spend considerable time establishing rapport before making their real request. They might engage in weeks of friendly conversation, remembering personal details about your life, expressing interest in your hobbies, and gradually building a sense of mutual trust and understanding. This investment of time and effort is not friendship, it is farming. They are cultivating your psychological soil, making it fertile for the seeds of manipulation they intend to plant later. Recognizing this pattern requires understanding the difference between genuine relationship building and strategic relationship manipulation. Authentic relationships develop organically, with mutual vulnerability, shared experiences, and reciprocal investment. Manipulative relationships, by contrast, follow a more calculated pattern. The manipulator gathers far more information about you than they share about themselves. Their interest in your life feels slightly excessive or inappropriate for the level of actual relationship you have. They remember details that serve their purposes while forgetting things that don't. The principle of calculated skepticism also extends to your own emotional responses. Manipulators are skilled at triggering specific emotional states that cloud judgment. They might make you feel guilty for not helping, angry at some perceived injustice, or fearful of missing out on an opportunity. These emotional manipulations work because they bypass your rational thinking processes and create a sense of urgency that prevents careful consideration. When you find yourself experiencing strong emotions in response to someone's request or proposal, this should serve as a red flag rather than a call to action. The manipulator counts on your emotional response overriding your analytical thinking. They want you to say yes quickly, before you have time to think through the implications or verify their claims. Developing immunity to emotional manipulation requires practicing what might be called emotional detachment with empathy. This means acknowledging your emotional response without being controlled by it. You can feel sympathy for someone's apparent distress while still maintaining enough psychological distance to evaluate their claims objectively. You can appreciate the urgency they express while refusing to let that urgency prevent you from taking the time necessary to make an informed decision. The implementation of calculated skepticism in daily life requires developing specific habits of thought and response. When presented with any request, proposal, or piece of information that requires action or acceptance from you, first, ask yourself what the speaker gains if you accept their information or comply with their request. Second, consider what independent sources might confirm or contradict their claims. Third, evaluate whether the timeline they present allows for adequate consideration, or whether the pressure for immediate response serves their interests more than yours. This process becomes particularly important when dealing with what Machiavelli observed as the appearance of virtue. Manipulators often frame their requests in terms of moral imperatives or social obligations. They make you feel that refusing their request would make you selfish, unreasonable, or morally deficient. This technique transforms their personal agenda into your moral duty, making resistance feel like a character flaw rather than prudent self-protection. The calculated skeptic recognizes that true moral obligations rarely require immediate action without consideration. Genuine emergencies that demand your immediate response are far rarer than manipulators would have you believe. Most requests that are framed as urgent moral imperatives are actually calculated attempts to bypass your decision-making process. The principle of information asymmetry, Machiavelli's second crucial insight, emerged from his careful observation of how power dynamics shifted based on who controlled information. In his diplomatic missions, he noticed that the most successful negotiators were not necessarily the most eloquent or charismatic, but rather those who possessed superior information while revealing as little as possible about their own knowledge and intentions. This observation translates directly into modern manipulation dynamics. The manipulator's power depends heavily on maintaining information asymmetry, knowing more about you than you know about them, understanding their true motivations while keeping you uncertain about yours, and having a clear strategy while leaving you reactive and confused. Consider the dynamic that develops when someone begins asking detailed questions about your personal life, your work situation, your relationships, or your financial circumstances. These conversations often feel like friendly interest or professional networking, but they serve a more calculating purpose. The manipulator is conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence that will later inform their approach to influencing your behavior. The information they seek falls into several categories, each serving specific manipulative purposes. They want to understand your psychological vulnerabilities, what makes you feel guilty, what triggers your fears, what appeals to your ego. They seek to identify your practical constraints, your financial pressures, your time limitations. They probe for your social connections. Who influences your decisions, whose approval you seek, whose disapproval you fear. Meanwhile, they reveal remarkably little about their own circumstances, motivations, or intentions. This asymmetry is not accidental but strategic. The more they know about you while keeping you uncertain about them, the more precisely they can calibrate their influence attempts, and the more unprepared you are to resist or counter their strategies. Recognizing and correcting information asymmetry requires conscious effort to rebalance these dynamics. This does not mean becoming secretive or paranoid in normal social interactions, but rather being aware of when information exchange becomes heavily one-sided and taking steps to correct that imbalance. When someone shows excessive interest in personal details about your life, especially details that don't seem directly relevant to your relationship or interaction, this should trigger your awareness of potential manipulation. Appropriate responses include redirecting the conversation to ask similar questions about their circumstances, politely declining to provide certain information, or simply noting the pattern for future reference. The principle of information asymmetry also applies to understanding the manipulator's true motivations and agenda. Skilled manipulators rarely reveal their actual objectives directly. Instead, they present surface-level rationales that seem reasonable while concealing their deeper motivations. They might claim to be motivated by friendship when they're actually seeking professional advantage. They might express concern for your well-being while actually working to create dependency. They might offer opportunities for mutual benefit while structuring arrangements that primarily serve their interests. Uncovering true motivations requires looking beyond stated reasons to examine actual patterns of behavior and outcomes. Ask yourself what the manipulator gains from each interaction, what patterns emerge over time, and whether their stated concerns align with their actual actions. Look for discrepancies between what they say they want and what their behavior suggests they're actually working toward. The correction of information asymmetry also involves strategic questioning. Instead of passively receiving information and requests, develop the habit of asking probing questions that reveal more about the other person's situation and motivations. When someone makes a request, ask about their alternatives. What happens if you say no? When they present an opportunity, inquire about the details they haven't mentioned. What are the risks? What are their backup plans? What other options have they considered? These questions serve multiple purposes. They provide you with better information for making decisions. They demonstrate that you're not easily manipulated, and they often make manipulators uncomfortable enough to reveal more about their true intentions or to seek easier targets elsewhere. Part 2. Advanced Defensive Strategies: The Principle of Temporal Control. Machiavelli's third insight concerned the manipulation of time and urgency. He observed that princes who controlled the pace of negotiations, who could force hasty decisions from their opponents while taking time for their own deliberations, held significant advantages. This principle applies directly to modern manipulation tactics, where creating artificial urgency becomes a primary weapon for bypassing rational decision-making processes. The manipulator understands that time pressure serves their interests in multiple ways. It prevents you from researching their claims, consulting with others, or carefully considering alternatives. It transforms their preferences into apparent necessities and their conveniences into your emergencies. Most importantly, it shifts the default from no to yes. Instead of needing good reasons to comply, you need good reasons to refuse under pressure. Recognizing artificial urgency requires understanding the difference between genuine time constraints and manufactured pressure. True emergencies affecting your interests create natural urgency. Manufactured emergencies serving someone else's interests create artificial pressure designed to benefit them at your potential expense. The skilled manipulator employs several techniques to create temporal pressure. They might claim that opportunities are limited in time, that delays will result in negative consequences, or that immediate action is necessary to prevent some feared outcome. They often combine these claims with emotional appeals, suggesting that hesitation reveals lack of trust, commitment, or intelligence. Defending against temporal manipulation requires establishing and maintaining control over your own decision-making timeline. This means developing comfort with responses like, "I need time to consider this. Let me check my calendar and get back to you," or "I don't make important decisions under pressure." These responses often reveal the manipulator's true intentions. Genuine offers and legitimate emergencies can accommodate reasonable consideration time, while manipulative schemes require immediate compliance. The principle of temporal control also involves understanding how manipulators use deadlines and scheduling to their advantage. They might insist on meeting at times that are convenient for them but stressful for you, knowing that your discomfort and time pressure will make you more compliant. They schedule important discussions when you're tired, distracted, or rushed, reducing your ability to think clearly and respond strategically. Taking control of timing means insisting on scheduling that serves your interests as well as theirs. It means recognizing when your mental state is not optimal for important decisions and postponing discussions until you can engage more effectively. It means understanding that your time and convenience matter as much as theirs, and that attempts to minimize or override your scheduling preferences often indicate manipulative intent. The temporal dimension of manipulation also extends to the pacing of relationship development and commitment escalation. Manipulators often push for rapid increases in intimacy, commitment, or dependency, knowing that slower development would allow you more opportunities to recognize problematic patterns or seek outside perspectives. In professional contexts, this might manifest as pushing for quick commitments to projects, partnerships, or agreements before you've had adequate time to understand the full scope of what you're agreeing to. In personal relationships, it might involve pressure for rapid escalation of intimacy, exclusivity, or major life decisions. Maintaining temporal control in these situations requires recognizing that healthy relationships and beneficial arrangements can withstand the test of reasonable consideration time. Proposals that truly serve your interests should become more appealing with careful examination, not less. Arrangements that require immediate commitment without adequate consideration time are structured to benefit someone other than you. The principle of social proof manipulation, Machiavelli's fourth principle, emerged from his observation of how public opinion could be shaped and weaponized. He noted that people's beliefs and behaviors were heavily influenced by their perceptions of what others believed and did, and that skilled manipulators could exploit this tendency by controlling or misrepresenting social consensus. Modern manipulators employ social proof manipulation in sophisticated ways, creating false impressions of widespread support, approval, or participation to influence your decisions. They understand that humans have evolved to use social consensus as a shortcut for determining appropriate behavior, especially in uncertain or ambiguous situations. The manipulation of social proof takes several forms. The manipulator might claim that everyone is participating in some opportunity, supporting some position, or making some decision. They present anecdotal evidence of others' positive experiences while omitting negative outcomes. They create artificial scarcity by claiming high demand or limited availability. They use testimonials, reviews, or endorsements that may be fabricated, purchased, or heavily curated. In professional settings, social proof manipulation might involve claims about industry standards, common practices, or what successful people typically do. The manipulator presents their preferred course of action as the obvious choice that any reasonable person would make, while framing alternatives as unusual, risky, or indicative of poor judgment. Defending against social proof manipulation requires developing skills for independently evaluating claims about social consensus. This means seeking verification from diverse independent sources rather than accepting the manipulator's characterizations of what others think or do. It means recognizing that true consensus develops through independent evaluation by multiple parties, while manufactured consensus relies on coordinated messaging and limited information sources. The principle also involves understanding your own susceptibility to social proof influence. Most people underestimate how much their decisions are influenced by perceptions of social consensus, making them vulnerable to manipulation of these perceptions. Developing resistance requires conscious effort to base decisions on independent evaluation of evidence rather than assumptions about what others would do. Effective defense against social proof manipulation includes actively seeking contrary evidence and dissenting opinions. When someone claims broad support for their position or proposal, specifically look for credible sources that disagree. When they present testimonials or success stories, investigate whether negative experiences are being systematically excluded from the presentation. The manipulation of social proof also operates through the creation of false consensus within your immediate social circle. Manipulators may coordinate with associates to create the impression that multiple independent sources are recommending the same course of action, when in reality they are all advancing the same agenda through apparently separate communications. Recognizing this coordinated manipulation requires paying attention to timing, consistency of messaging, and whether supposed independent sources seem to have suspiciously similar talking points or recommendations. Genuine consensus typically develops gradually with variation in language and emphasis, while manufactured consensus often exhibits uniformity that suggests coordination. The principle of reciprocity weaponization, Machiavelli's fifth principle, concerned the strategic use of favors, gifts, and apparent generosity to create obligations that could later be leveraged for greater advantage. He observed that the most successful manipulators understood how to trigger reciprocity impulses while maintaining careful accounting of debts owed to them. The manipulation of reciprocity operates through the exploitation of a fundamental social norm, the expectation that kindness should be repaid with kindness, that favors create obligations, and that refusing reasonable requests from those who have helped you violates basic social contract principles. Manipulators weaponize this norm by strategically providing benefits that create psychological debts they can later collect. The skilled manipulator begins this process by offering unsolicited assistance, gifts, or favors. These initial offerings are carefully calculated to be valuable enough to create genuine appreciation, while being affordable enough that the manipulator can provide them without significant cost. The timing of these offerings is also strategic. They often occur when you're experiencing stress, difficulty, or uncertainty, making the assistance feel particularly valuable and meaningful. The true purpose of these strategic favors becomes apparent later when the manipulator begins making requests that leverage the psychological debt they've created. They might reference their previous assistance explicitly, saying things like, "After all I've done for you," or "I was hoping you could return the favor." More sophisticated manipulators make the connection implicitly, relying on your own sense of obligation to motivate compliance without needing to make the exchange explicit. Defending against reciprocity manipulation requires understanding the difference between genuine generosity and strategic investment in future obligations. Authentic generosity is offered without expectation of specific return, while manipulative assistance is provided with clear expectation of future compliance. Genuine helpers are pleased when their assistance proves valuable but don't maintain detailed accounting of debts owed. Manipulative helpers keep careful track of what they've provided and when they can reasonably collect. The key defense involves recognizing when offered assistance comes with implicit strings attached. This doesn't mean becoming suspicious of all generosity, but rather being aware when the timing, circumstances, or nature of offered help suggests strategic rather than altruistic motivations. Unsolicited assistance from someone who barely knows you, help that seems disproportionate to your relationship, or aid that comes with subtle suggestions about future expectations should trigger increased awareness. When you recognize potential reciprocity manipulation, you have several response options. You can politely decline assistance you don't actually need, clearly stating that you don't want to feel obligated. You can accept help while explicitly clarifying that you're not committing to future reciprocation. Or you can accept assistance while making immediate reciprocation, preventing the accumulation of psychological debt. The manipulation of reciprocity also extends to emotional and social favors. Manipulators might provide emotional support, social inclusion, or ego gratification specifically to create obligations for future compliance. They remember your birthday, include you in social activities, or offer compliments and validation, not from genuine care, but as strategic investments in your sense of obligation to them. This emotional reciprocity manipulation can be particularly difficult to recognize and resist because it exploits fundamental human needs for connection, validation, and social belonging. The defense requires maintaining awareness of whether someone's emotional investment in you feels proportionate to your actual relationship, and whether their support comes with subtle expectations for your behavior or loyalty. Part 3. Mastery and Implementation. The Principle of Dependency Prevention. Machiavelli's final and perhaps most crucial insight concerned the prevention of dependency relationships that serve the manipulator's interests while undermining your autonomy and options. Approach is the preceding evidence of a dependence and interest. He observed that the most effective long-term control came not from single acts of manipulation, but from gradually creating circumstances where compliance became the path of least resistance and independence seemed increasingly difficult or costly. Modern manipulators employ sophisticated dependency creation strategies across multiple dimensions of life. They work to make you financially dependent by controlling income sources, encouraging debt, or creating situations where your economic well-being relies on their continued favor. They foster emotional dependency by isolating you from other support systems while positioning themselves as your primary source of validation, understanding, and emotional support. They create practical dependency by involving themselves in critical aspects of your daily life, until their withdrawal would create significant disruption. The creation of dependency typically follows a gradual progression that makes each step seem reasonable, while the cumulative effect drastically reduces your freedom and options. The manipulator begins by offering to handle certain tasks or responsibilities. Over time, you lose familiarity and confidence with managing these areas yourself, while the manipulator's involvement becomes increasingly integral to your functioning. In professional contexts, dependency manipulation might involve a manager who insists on being involved in all your projects, making direct relationships with colleagues or clients difficult, while ensuring that your professional network and reputation depend on their continued support. In personal relationships, it might manifest as a partner who gradually takes over financial management, social scheduling, or decision-making, always with apparently reasonable explanations but with the cumulative effect of reducing your independence. Recognizing dependency creation requires monitoring changes in your autonomy and options over time. Ask yourself whether you're becoming less capable of independent action in various life areas, whether your network of relationships and resources is becoming more concentrated around particular individuals, and whether saying no to certain people has become increasingly difficult or costly. The prevention of manipulative dependency requires actively maintaining diversification across multiple life dimensions. This means keeping multiple income sources or professional relationships, maintaining independent social connections, preserving your own decision-making authority, and ensuring that you retain the practical skills and resources necessary for independent functioning. Financial independence deserves particular attention because economic dependency creates vulnerability to manipulation across all other life areas. This doesn't necessarily mean being wealthy, but rather maintaining enough economic autonomy that you can make decisions based on your actual preferences rather than economic necessity. It means avoiding arrangements that make your economic well-being entirely dependent on any single person's continued goodwill. Emotional independence is equally crucial and often more challenging to maintain. This involves cultivating multiple sources of validation, understanding, and emotional support rather than allowing any single person to become your primary source of psychological well-being. It means developing internal sources of self-worth that don't depend on others' approval and maintaining relationships that provide honest feedback rather than only telling you what they think you want to hear. The manipulation of dependency also operates through the control of information and skill development. Manipulators may discourage you from learning certain skills, gaining particular knowledge, or developing relationships that would increase your independence, daddy. They frame this discouragement in terms of efficiency, specialization, or protection, but the underlying effect is to maintain your dependency on their knowledge, skills, or relationships. Defending against this manipulation requires insisting on your right to develop diverse capabilities and knowledge, even when others offer to handle certain areas for you. It means recognizing that being able to depend on others is valuable, but being required to depend on others is dangerous. Healthy interdependence involves choice and reciprocity, while manipulative dependency involves constraint and one-sided benefit. The implementation of dependency prevention also requires establishing and maintaining clear boundaries about what you will and will not allow others to control or manage on your behalf. These boundaries should be based on your long-term interests rather than short-term convenience, and they should be maintained even when others express disappointment, frustration, or claims that your boundaries are unnecessary or unreasonable. Integration and daily practice, the mastery of these 6 Machiavellian principles, requires their integration into a coherent defensive strategy that becomes second nature through consistent practice. Like any sophisticated skill set, protection against manipulation demands conscious development until the necessary responses become automatic reflexes rather than deliberate choices. The integration process begins with developing heightened awareness of manipulation attempts in your daily life. This doesn't mean becoming paranoid or cynical, but rather training yourself to recognize the specific patterns and techniques that manipulators employ. Begin by observing interactions where you feel pressured, confused, or obligated to act against your preferences, and analyze these situations using the 6 principles as diagnostic tools. Daily practice involves implementing specific habits that strengthen your resistance to manipulation while maintaining your ability to engage authentically with others. Start each day by reviewing your commitments and obligations, asking yourself whether they truly serve your interests or primarily benefit others. When new requests or opportunities arise, implement a standard evaluation process that includes verification of claims, assessment of time pressure, investigation of the requester's motivations, and consideration of alternatives. The development of manipulation immunity also requires regular exercises in saying no to requests that don't genuinely serve your interests. This practice is crucial because manipulators specifically target people who have difficulty refusing requests, knowing that each successful manipulation makes future manipulation easier. Start with low-stakes situations where refusing has minimal consequences, gradually building your comfort and skill with declining requests that primarily benefit others. Equally important is the cultivation of independent decision-making capabilities. This involves regularly making choices based on your own analysis and preferences rather than deferring to others' recommendations or following social consensus. Practice evaluating options without seeking external validation, trusting your own judgment even when it differs from popular opinion, and taking responsibility for your decisions rather than allowing others to decide for you. The maintenance of strong boundaries becomes a daily practice that prevents manipulative relationships from developing in the first place. This includes being selective about sharing personal information, maintaining independence in various life areas, and refusing to allow others to become overly involved in your decision-making processes. With Trust Teddy, strong boundaries communicate that you're not an easy target for manipulation, while still allowing for genuine connection with others. The integration of these principles also requires developing a support network of people who respect your autonomy and provide honest feedback about your situations and relationships. This network serves as a reality check when manipulators attempt to distort your perception of normal behavior or reasonable expectations. Choose advisors who have demonstrated good judgment in their own lives and who aren't afraid to tell you difficult truths when necessary. Regular self-assessment becomes an essential practice for maintaining manipulation immunity. Set aside time weekly to review your recent interactions, commitments, and relationships, asking whether any patterns suggest manipulative influence. Consider whether you're making decisions that primarily serve others' interests, whether you're becoming increasingly dependent on particular people, and whether you're maintaining adequate autonomy in various life areas. The ultimate goal is not to become isolated or cynical, but rather to engage with others from a position of strength and clear thinking. The person who has mastered these Machiavellian principles can afford to be generous, trusting, and collaborative because they're doing so from choice rather than manipulation. They can distinguish between genuine opportunities for mutual benefit and schemes designed to exploit their goodwill. In the end, Machiavelli's insights remain as relevant today as they were 5 centuries ago, because human nature itself remains unchanged. The manipulators among us still exploit the same psychological vulnerabilities, still employ the same fundamental strategies, and still rely on their target's ignorance of these patterns to achieve their objectives. The difference lies in your knowledge of their methods and your commitment to defending your mental sovereignty against those who would compromise it for their own advantage. The practice of these principles becomes not just a defensive strategy, but a way of living that honors your own autonomy while respecting others' legitimate interests. It represents the difference between being manipulated and being influenced, between compliance and cooperation, between weakness and wisdom. In mastering your mind against manipulators, you claim your rightful place as the author of your own choices and the architect of your own destiny. As Machiavelli himself understood, knowledge of these principles carries with it the responsibility to use them ethically. The same techniques that protect you from manipulation can themselves become tools of manipulation, if employed without moral constraint. The true mastery lies not just in defensive capability, but in the wisdom to use that capability in service of justice, truth, and genuine human flourishing. The manipulators will always be among us, employing their ancient arts in modern contexts, seeking to bend others' wills to serve their purposes. But armed with these principles, practiced in their application, and committed to your own autonomy, you need not be their victim. You can engage with the world from a position of strength, making choices that truly serve your interests while maintaining your integrity and your capacity for authentic connection with others. The battle for your mind is fought daily, in countless small interactions and seemingly minor decisions. Victory belongs not to the strongest or most charismatic, but to those who understand the game being played and who have prepared themselves to play it skillfully. In that preparation and understanding lies your freedom. Master your mind against manipulators. 6 tricks from Machiavelli.